G'day, Ben from Duck Playing Chicken here with the final installment of this build series of the Hasegawa Regult from the Macross universe. And this episode is all about the painting and decals and basically finishing it off. Before I talk about the colour choices, I want to talk a little bit about the cleanup that I've done since the last video. So a lot of these pieces are set up in two halves. So you can see I've done some gap filling, I've sanded it down. It doesn't look too obvious, but there was actually quite a bit of work in sort of cleaning these up. So there's a few pieces where you can sort of see the filler that I've used and cleaned it up. Now I've done that for a number of pieces, mainly on the legs. So you can sort of see the fit is reasonable, but there's just the sort of seam lines there that I just wanted to deal with. And for dealing with seam lines, because they weren't massive holes, I used Mr. Surfacer 500. I tend to find the stuff's really good, dries quick, sands really well. So that's what I tend to use. The other thing that I've had to do is mask off where mask off the lights where I can't sort of deal with them separately. So you can see on the base of the leg there, and also in the nozzles on the back, it's a bit hard to see, but there's actually a bit of blue tack down there to mask it off. So that's what I've had to do there. The other thing I wanted to highlight was this base piece of the main body unit. It actually comes as sort of two pieces that pull apart, and you can see there's these post holes here, and they are actually supposed to line up with pegs that are on the bottom here, and you can see I've cut them off. The reason I've cut them off is because this had a massive seam line right down the middle, and being the front of it, it's going to be really noticeable. So what I've done is I've actually glued it together, so it's all one piece now, and sort of sanded it. And of course that sort of presented a problem as far as, well, how does it now attach to this? And I've sort of put it together and worked out that for the base piece that goes in, this can now just clip in, so I can paint it separately. Okay, so you can see that I won't have to sort of mask this off. This was one of the things I was sort of worried about masking. It actually holds in there, and this plate here connects to the bottom of the frame. So it is actually going to all hold in place once it's sort of together, and I can always add a little bit of glue if needed. But I just want to highlight that. I know I didn't really cover that in the initial video. So colour choices. First of all, for the white areas, I'll be going completely unoriginal and using SMS white. As far as the priming of the white goes, I'll actually be using the Surfacer Grey. And the reason I use grey when I'm painting white is just because it's a lot easier to sort of see when you're painting it, because these are white pieces. You know, painting white over white, it's really difficult to see where you've been. So I'll be priming all those with grey, but painting just with white. For the light blue pieces, and this is kind of a strange colour, I've tried to go with close to the plastic. So this is a custom mix that I've come up with, and it was actually the same custom mix I used when I did the Lasner. So I found that colour matches pretty well, and I always like to use up my custom mixes if I can, because you tend to find, or otherwise you end up with 1,000,001 bottles of custom mixes that you never use. So the mix of that is predominantly white, probably about 80% white, and then 15% of SMS of violet, and then just a touch of this SMS PN blue, so 204. So that gives it the slight blue tinge. There's only about 5% of that. So that's what makes up the custom mix. And I'll probably be priming these in Surfacer Grey or white. I haven't really decided. I'm going to look at what I did for the Lasner to see what I did there, but I think I'll probably do it in white. Now the grey, there is a large amount of grey on the sort of frame components and also on the weapons. So for the grey I'll be using SMS charcoal, and I'll be priming with Surfacer Black. Now if we have a look at the colour callouts, it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but on the jet nozzles on the back of the legs and also the internal of the nozzles on the jets on the side here, they actually call out a couple of metallics. So the metallics I'll be using is for two SMS ones here. So for the outer rim of the nozzle on the legs I'll be using gunmetal, and then for the internals of the nozzles I'll be using steel. So they're only on very few places, so there's not a lot. On the paint call out, they actually call out sort of a shiny red for the red light, so if you're not going to go down the path I did of lighting them up, they give you an indication of what colour to use. And I think that's pretty much it. It doesn't have a lot of colours in it, this kit, so pretty straightforward for painting, I think. Okay, so next bit is priming and start painting everything up. I've done a lot of the painting on the parts, and I just want to sort of pick out a couple of things. So first of all, the colour that I used for the light blue, and now it was just, I think, a stroke of luck that the colour I used for the Laser is almost identical. The difference here, so here you can see this is the raw plastic colour and this is the one I chose, so there's just a slight difference there. So I got that pretty close. So this is the hatch of the main body, and I've done this grey section in here which I now have to mask off and paint the rest the light blue. So I'm pretty happy with that colour selection. The dark grey, the charcoal, now it's coming up pretty dark on camera, but it is a really nice colour. It's almost got a bit of blue in it. It's a nice sort of cool, cool grey. I kind of like that, so I think that was a good choice. It will lighten up a little bit once I put a matte coat on it. One thing that I sort of thought about was with the white parts, if I leave the parts just the bare plastic and throw a matte coat over them. I have done that before on some other kits that I've built previously, but for this one I had some issues where I'm going to have to clean up some seam lines, so I'm going to have to clean up these parts when they go on there. So that's the main reason why I paint the white on this kit. The other thing is the white I'm using may be a bit tricky to see on camera, but it is just a little bit more off-white than the white of the plastic, so I actually prefer that. I don't think it should be that sort of really brilliant white. I want to just take it down a notch, so I'm pretty happy with that. With the leg part, this is probably going to be the most sort of complex part of the painting process, because you can see I've got one half of the white piece on, and you can see how much of the grey is exposed. And what I want to do is basically put the white pieces on, these two halves, deal with this seam on the front, and there's also going to be on the back here. I want to deal with those and then be able to paint it. So that means all this grey area that's exposed I'm going to have to mask. And I want to try and mask it as cleanly as possible. So I'm trying to think of a way of doing that. And I think what I'm going to have to do is get the tape sort of just under the edge there, and hopefully I can pull it up again once this is all done. Worst case scenario, I'll be able to cut along the line, but I think that's the only way of doing it, so I get a really nice clean line. I don't want to be doing any sort of liquid masking down this edge, because it actually goes in, it's recessed in there. So I think I need to sort of get some tape, maybe just coming a little bit over this lip here, and hopefully I can pull it out. Or like I said, worst case scenario, I can trim it. So I think that's the way I'm going to mask it, and I'll come back and show you what that masking looks like once I've got that done. So I've masked up one of the legs ready to go. You can sort of see there that essentially the only area that's not masked off is the area that will be covered by this white piece. So if I put that in, I do want to make sure the wire goes on this side of the polycap. Okay, so you can see there's obviously a seam I need to deal with here. So what I'll be doing is using some Tamiya extra thin cement to run down there, clamping it together. Also on the back, it looks like I will need to use some putty. But I should be able to get a nice clean delineation between the grey and the white once I've cleaned that up. So I'm going to quickly sort of show you the process of how I go about it on the other one here. So this one I haven't started the masking yet. So for this process I'm going to use the wider Tamiya tape I've got and just take off a bit. You don't need to do it all in one shot, so what I want to do is just start at one of the corners. I don't want the tape to be burnished down on anything else yet because I want to go in the direction and make sure that it doesn't get caught up on anything. And so what I'm doing is just using a toothpick and just running it along that edge there. You don't want to do it too hard because you don't want to punch holes in it. And then I'll just burnish it down on the side and burnish it down up here as well. So, you know, that's reasonably straightforward. That's what you would normally do when you're masking. But I didn't want to... The problem is that this lip here, the white sort of overhangs over this lip. So what I could do is cut just past the edge there. And if I go this way, and you'll notice that the way I'm holding the piece, I'm following the natural arc that my wrist wants to hold the piece. So there's my graphic design background coming back to haunt me. And maybe this might be a bit easier to sort of see, but I've just gone just over that lip. Now basically follow that process all the way around, so on the back of the leg and also for the front piece. I'll just cut along that line there, so hopefully that will give me a good masking foundation. So I've been busy laying down the decals, water slide decals. They're going down just fine. I've put some Macross on them so they're all sort of settling at the moment. I did have a bit of an issue with this one though. This one did actually break on me, so I sort of had to stitch it back together, but thankfully it wasn't too bad, and all the other decals went down perfectly fine. So they're sort of settling there. They're sort of still in the state of being all wrinkled while the Macross does its thing. Now next thing I want to do is take off the masking on the legs, and I am a bit concerned about this. I did sort of go through and of course glued these two pieces together and cleaned up the seams. It is hard to see with white, but it's actually come up really smooth. The only problem is around these vents at the top here. It's always really difficult to sort of get these, where you got two halves come together, it's really hard to get these sort of looking right, because sometimes they don't line up perfectly. So I've also cleaned up the seam on the back here. So now it's just a matter of sort of seeing how good my masking is. Now the reason I'm concerned about this is because when I glued the two white halves together, there was the glue seeped down in, and I had some grey paint sort of come up through the gaps. So I'm not sure how much of a mess that's going to leave underneath. I'm kind of hoping that it's minimal, and if there is an issue that I can sort of do a small mask area and repaint it. We shall see. It's a problem with, I mean, the Tamiya extra thin cement is fantastic, and it certainly revolutionised my modelling techniques. But one issue with it is that it will follow a path using capillary action quite far. So if you've got a painted surface that you're using it on, especially with lacquers, I tend to find that it can upset the paint. So I'm just working on this nice and slowly. Lacquer paints are pretty hardy, so I don't have to be too careful. I know if I was doing this with water-based acrylics, I'd probably be struggling. But it looks pretty clean. There's a slight issue here at the top of the arch, but I think that's pretty minimal. I still think the method of masking these grey areas off and fixing up the seam on the white, it's definitely worth it. It's worth the effort. It's just because it's sort of one of the main features of the kit is the long legs of it. You are going to notice if there's a seam line running down the guts. Alright, well I don't seem to have had any sort of issues, because I was really worried about this point here. I had some grey sort of appear when I put the glue down, so it doesn't seem to have made a mess of it, which is good. Yes, very happy with that masking effort, and that's good. The grey is looking a bit dark on camera, but it is a bit lighter in real life, so it looks almost black there, but it's definitely grey. Okay, so now I've got that done. I have some decals to put on the back of the legs, and that will be the last of the decals. So I'll give everything a gloss coat and do the panel lining. On the home stretch now, ready for panel lining. And for this I'll be using panel line accent colour black. Now it might come up as a little bit too contrasty on the white, but I don't think it'll bother me that much. There's not a lot of panel lines on the white pieces, and I kind of think it'll be maybe a bit strange to go grey on here and then do black on the light blue pieces, so I decided just to go black. So of course I've done this plenty of times before. I've put a gloss coat down, and it's just a matter of just tapping the edge of the line and the capillary action do the hard work. And as with all my builds, I try to minimise the mess that I make. It just saves time in the cleanup. Now the fact that I've sort of made a bit of an error there, it doesn't matter, because I'll be able to clean that up. Let's see how it looks on the white pieces. So this is the under part of the foot, and these areas in here are actually supposed to be sort of vents or thrusters or something like that. I'm not quite sure, so they should be quite black. And I intend to leave this dry for 24 hours. I tend to find 12 hours probably enough, and probably plenty in most cases, especially when you're just talking about a small amount of this stuff. But I'm gonna get this done tonight, all the pieces, and then tomorrow I'll be able to do all the cleanup. Okay, I think you get the idea. So what I'm going to do is finish the panel lining, and then I will clean it all up just using shellite, or you can use enamel thinner, just with a cotton bud sort of rubbing over it, over the top of the panel lines, and that's all I use to clean it up. I'll clean through all the pieces once, then I'll do it a second time just to make sure I haven't missed anything, and then I'm going to put a matte coat. And so I think that'll be the next step I'll show you, is where I've got all the pieces matte coated, and it'll be down to the final assembly of the kit and finish up all the wiring. Sometimes my most favourite part of a build, and sometimes somewhat frustrating. So the final assembly of the Hasegawa Regult, and I have done a little bit of assembly off camera just to sort of show you what the end result will be for those things that I have to do two of. So the first one is the jets that go on the side of the main body part. So decal on, and if I get battery and show you what the lighting looks like. There we go. That I reckon that's come up pretty good. Of course, it's quite a bit of light here, so it's not coming up so well, but I'm pretty happy with it. So that's one of those side head thrusters done, and the leg. So one of the legs all sort of put together, and again testing the wiring. I like to do this fairly regularly, just mind you at this point it's probably too late if I've had any LEDs go on me, but we can see there's the thruster underneath and the two lights on the front. They look pretty good. So what I do is just show you what I went through to sort of put these together. I'm going to start with the side thruster. And so what I've done is I've taken the masking that I had in there, taken that off after I've finished all the painting and the matte varnish. And I need to take this very small part here and glue it in the middle of the frosted plastic. So for this I'm just using medium super glue, medium thickness or density, whatever you want to call it. It's a little bit thick, but not overboard. And you only need the smallest amount. So I'm going to put a little bit on my tray here, and pick this piece up with some tweezers, and I'm just going to put a couple of small sort of dabs, just different points. So now I need to drop it as best I can in the middle. Look at that. So it's really about getting that hot spot sort of right in that center hole as best I can. Now I need to feed the wires sort of through the guts of this, and through the guts this way, so through that hole, and then they will come out through the hole on the back here. So I've just got to straighten the wire to make it a bit easier to sort of thread through to the back. Use my magnets, I can feel them sort of snap in, which is good. So it all holds in, and then I need to feed the wires through the back hole. Alright, once they're in place I can put this top piece in. And make sure I get it around the right way. There we go. Okay, so that's the other side thruster done, and of course once I get the main head assembly done, or what I call a head assembly, they'll feed through on the side. So the next step is the other leg, and the way that I've wired this up, and also from the decals on the foot, there is obviously a left and right side, so you just need to be conscious of that when you're putting it together. So the first thing I need to do is feed the wires through the knuckle piece, and of course I've got the heat shrink, which is a bit difficult to see, but that's going to assist me with feeding the wires through. I just want to make sure I've got it around the right way. It looks like I have. Okay, so feed them both through. And when I'm joining it up, I want to make sure that the wires aren't getting caught on anything. There's the poly cap in there, and there's sort of a clamp. You can see on this one, this clamp piece that goes around the poly cap. So you just want to make sure the wire doesn't get sort of caught up in that. Now this top thigh bit, as I call it, this is one of the pieces where it's really important that you get it around the right way, because it has a decal on one side but not on the other. So I know that this is the right leg, so I know it needs to go that way. And again, I'm just feeding the wire through the heat shrink to say it is working just as intended. So I'm very happy with that. It means I know the wires aren't getting caught up anywhere inside that particular piece. And again, when I'm putting it together, I just want to make sure the wires aren't getting crimped with that polycap joints. Okay, so the hip, in this particular case, it faces down, and of course the wires need to come up through this hole. And we can see those two holes where the wires come up through and how they match up with the hip joint. So that way the wires don't get crimped or anything. Alright, so we have the foot to go, and I've found that it is easier to put this piece in first. So this goes into the top of the ankle assembly. So putting this assembly in first is a lot easier than having the whole sort of foot assembly and trying to find where that hole is. So I'm going to put the what I call the toe. I'm sure these have got proper names in the universe and that I'm not using the correct terminology. And then finally we have the foot piece, and you'll notice that there's one that has the decal and the other doesn't. So the one with the decal, that actually faces out, so I know that needs to go out that way. And this is a bit of a tight fit just because I've painted all the surfaces. But once it goes in, it is reasonably rigid, so that's good. It means it's going to be able to hold the pose better. Alright, so now I can see that it stands up, of which it does. So we now have the 2 feet, so you can see the the decal down here and on this side, and also the hips. So the final stage sort of for the legs is to get the wiring through the hip component. So I've got the back half of the sort of hip joint here, and so I need to feed a wire through the side and then up through the top. And I've kept these pieces separate so that it would make it a bit easier to feed the wires, and I kind of figured you're not going to see this seam once it's all together and once the legs are in place. So first of all, am I going to be able to get the others through? It's looking promising. So now I can get the other half on. If we have a look at the back, you can just see the wires poking through, but you know, unless you're really looking for it, you're not going to spot it. So I think I've sort of found a nice balance between lighting the kit and trying to reduce the amount of wiring that's actually visible on the outside. I've made a start on the body unit, and what you're looking at here is kind of the inner skeleton of it. So here's the front and of course the back. So I want to talk a little bit about, I wired up a switch and I just want to talk about how the battery is going to work. So I set up this little plug here so that I can take the LiPo battery out and charge it, and of course it's color coded, so that'll plug in like that, and then will sit like that, so it's nice and it's sort of a bit loose in there, but that's all right. And then the back door will sort of snap in place like that with the magnet, so that sort of keeps it all secure. It's not wobbling around, it's just a bit of a sort of friction fit. So the switch basically has two wires coming out of it, and that is to make the connection between the positive terminal on the battery and the positive on the LEDs. So if I turn around and sort of show what's going on, first of all, this black wire, this is coming straight from the battery. So this is the negative, and that will be wired to the negative of all the LEDs, sort of all soldered together. The positive terminal from the battery is coming out the back here on this red wire, and then it goes to what I've used is, this is just sort of a little jumper jack, like a pin header. And you'll notice that I've got a resistor sticking in there. Now, if you watched the electronics I did the last couple of episodes, you'll know that I'm using one resistor. Not best practice, I know. Every LED should have its own resistor, but I'm sort of taking a bit of a calculated gamble here. Now, having this jumper like this with the resistor in it, it means I can change out the resistor, and the reason I might want to do that is might want to adjust the brightness a little bit. So of course the more resistance there is, the less charge is going through the LEDs, and I can dim them a little bit. On the other end of the connector, it goes to the switch, and it just feeds in through the back. So this really thin wire here that's coming out is the other positive from the switch, and so essentially we've got the really thin wire, which is the positive, and the black wire, which is the negative, and they will both be wired up to all the LEDs. So it's a little bit confusing in there, it's sort of a little bit messy, a little bit, musical chairs, but it'll be fine once it's all sort of wired up and sorted out. But the main thing I wanted to sort of explain is why I've got the resistor set up instead of soldering it in place. I just wanted to try things out. I haven't actually had all 15 LEDs turned on at the same time using this battery source yet. So it's going to be a lot of trial and error once it's kind of all together. I'm going to start with the side and the bottom piece. So I'm going to take this bit here, snap that into place, and then these two pegs tap into the bottom of the body. I do have a hole in here where the wire will be fed up from the hips. So let's put that in place. And the next thing will be the side components. I've got to remember which way they go. I do want to make sure, I'm going to leave the top off for now, but you can see that hole down the bottom where the wires will be coming up through for the legs, so I won't be putting the top on just yet until I've got all the wiring sort of sorted out. Now I had a bit of a mishap with this particular peg here. It snapped off in there, so I'm going to have to, I don't know if I'm going to need to glue it in or not. Alright, so we've sort of got the sides on. I think probably the next thing is to look at the back. Now the back has two holes in it for the red LEDs. Actually it's got four holes, sorry, it's got four LEDs that go in here. So I need to work out how best to wire these up. I haven't worked out what's going to be sort of the best way of doing this, whether I could just sort of tape them in place. I don't really want to glue them in place. because that may affect the clear red. So I'm thinking I might even use maybe even just a bit of that silver tape that I've sort of been using for light blocking. That might be the best option. Maybe if I put a big bit of tape over that. Okay, let's see how that looks. Getting a little bit of light leak, so I reckon once I tape it down I might use a bit of, I may use a little bit of fabric paint, and that'll also hold it down as well. Okay, I've jumped ahead a little bit, and the reason was I started filming and it was basically a whole lot of shots of my head in the way and my Optivisor in each shot. So I apologise, I did a lot of the sort of wiring off camera, but I think it's probably pretty straightforward to sort of explain. Essentially, like on the back here, we've got 4 LEDs, and so the wires for those sort of feed in through the back here. They actually go sort of underneath the part in the frame, and they all come out the top here. Same with the side thrusters. The wires go in through the side, and they come out in the front. And you can sort of see in here where those wires come out, and they all end up here as well. There's of course the front eye as well. So that wire just comes up, and the wires for the legs, they sort of go up through the hip, they go up through the middle, and they also come out. Now essentially what I've got is about 15 pairs of wires that I've somehow got to solder all the positives together and then all the negatives together. And so just to sort of show you the light blocking that I did, just using again the tulip fabric paint, does a really good job, so that these 2 LEDs, there's not going to be any sort of light escaping. Now of course this bit goes on the top here, and that'll be the last thing I do, so I need to essentially wire all these things up, get them all soldered together, which is going to be easier said than done because there is a lot of wires going on in here, and they're sort of all tangled and in a mess. So I will be doing that off camera. Once I get it sort of all soldered together, I can quickly show you what that sort of looks like. Okay, we are getting to the scary part of the build where I've got to try and get everything inside without breaking any of the wires. So I managed to solder all the positives and all the negatives together, which was a absolute nightmare. I think if I was to do this build again, I would probably do it a little bit differently, but anyway, it's done. The resistor, I have actually checked it and I did the calculation. So this is actually a 120 ohm resistor in here. It's probably a higher value than what I need, but given that I'm just using the one resistor and I don't really want to burn out any LEDs, I thought I'd play it safe. So now I've got to try and sort of feed everything down into the cavity so that it doesn't, so the wires don't get caught on anything. And just sort of push those stuff down into the gap. See, I've still got room to put the battery in. I think what I'll do is I'll install the battery and make sure I get the polarity around the right way and get this door on. Alright, fingers crossed. We got the last of the little weapons to put on, and then we're going to see if this works. You'll notice there's a bit of a gap on the side, and I don't know what's causing it. It's not a wire in the way or anything like that. It just doesn't seem to bed down properly. Okay, so now I'll try and turn this on. Alright, backlights work. That's good. Do actually have jet lights. We got two on the top. We have the eye. My God, it is a miracle. That is an absolute miracle. You can see they are lit up. And another one. And of course the battery's fallen out. Alright. I'm going to call that a win. That was absolute game of musical chairs. I have not done anything quite as stupid as putting this many LEDs in a kit like this. And look, if you value your sanity, I recommend don't do what I do. I think you know, it's going to look good. But it's a lot of messing around. So I'm just going to issue with wires sort of sitting where they're supposed to. So the next step is for me to photograph this guy while it still works. So there's actually proof that I've done it. Oh boy, it's just stupid crazy, that is. Why did I do that to myself? However, I reckon it's going to look cool. So let me get some photos of it all lit up, and that one's done. There's just a couple of things that I wanted to sort of talk quickly about. First of all, how long it took me. Talking about 45 hours in total, and a good bulk of that was the wiring. The wiring was incredibly fiddly, so that was a big part of it. The other thing is the decals. The decals went on pretty well. I only had sort of one break on me, and that was sort of the one up the top, but it was easy enough to repair. Now, I was sort of thinking about using these alphabet characters to put duck playing chicken somewhere on the kit, but I didn't really have that much room to sort of do that, and I would suspect that you're probably going to do it on the sides of these hips here if you were going to, you know, put in some custom wording, and potentially down the side here of the gills. So yeah, I didn't end up using, you know I said I'd probably put a duck playing chicken reference in there, but I didn't end up doing that. I just used the standard decals that they suggested in the instructions. As far as the kit goes, I think it is better than the older Repop Bandai kit I showed in the first video. I think the build's a little bit better. It does have some quirks, like the interior is a bit strange and you get kind of weird gaps like this, but you know, if all you want to do is paint it and slap it together, it shouldn't take you that long. It's a very straightforward kit, and you know, there's not a lot of sort of masking that you have to do or what have you. I did a little bit on the legs just because I wanted to deal with the seams, but if you're not too fussed about that, you know, you don't really need to do any masking. On with the beauty shots, and until the next build series, I'll catch you later.